Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Folks, we are here with Ashton Woods, Ashton P. Woods, who is the founder of Black Lives Matter Houston. And actually, it's one of the more, I like to call it one of the bigger Black Lives Matters in the country. I meet with you all the time at Netroots all over the country. How you been doing?
I've been good. I have been trying to practice self-care to make sure that I'm able to function through all of this, because there are a lot of mouths moving and not enough critical thought happening. And so I'm just protecting my energy.
Well, I am glad to see that. I noticed that this morning you were at the George Floyd's funeral, and you actually got a very good interview from MSNBC. Let me go ahead and play that, and then we'll go back and talk about it.
Joining me now, Ashton Woods. Ashton's a longtime community organizer. He's the founder of Black Lives Matter Houston. Ashton, first of all, how do you hope that George Floyd is remembered here today?
So what I'm hoping for right now, after we lay him to rest, because his family deserves this closure so much, is that we are able to hold our elected leaders accountable to make sure that any policies, laws, or ordinances are either abolished or changed. We have to look beyond reforms. We actually have to look at the foundations that are cracked and the framing of buildings that are no longer viable, in the context that we need to look at what is not working, change it, and improve the lives of people, because this is a quality of life issue. Not only is it police brutality, but it's the policies that enable police brutality. It's the policies that affect us with our education, our health care. Let's not forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and our group, the Black community, is one of the most affected by that. So when we're talking about addressing police brutality, we're also talking about systems of oppression and white supremacy altogether. And so what I'm hoping to see from this after we lay George to rest is that people come together and find out what the actual causes are that led to his death and so many others, because he's the one we saw. How many people have been murdered in the last month and a half that we don't know about, or over the years? So that's where we have to start.
Democrats, as you know, unveiled a sweeping police reform bill on Monday. Here are just a few of the things that the bill calls for. Puts a ban on the use of chokeholds. Also bans those so-called no-knock warrants in federal drug cases. Limits the transfer of military equipment to local law enforcement. Requires training on racial bias and duty to intervene as well. Does this bill go far enough, in your view?
No, because all politics are local. In a lot of cities, including Minneapolis, that action that this officer took on George Floyd by placing his knee on the back of George's neck while the other three stood by and watched, those were already rules on the books. I think that they should pass it on the national level, but if you're going to pass bills like that, fund it with teeth to make sure it's being enforced, because I really do believe that we keep having conversations about calling police the one bad apple, when in fact, if the good police officer is not actually reporting and whistleblowing about the bad apples, they're just as much a part of the problem. The police can't police the police, and I believe that Congress, down to our state legislators and our other elected bodies on the local level, have more power to do just those things and much more. I believe that they could work, but it has to be enforced. And if we don't fund these bills as we're passing them as symbolic gestures, that's all they'll be, is symbolic gestures. We're looking for justice right now, and that has to be real and concrete.
Ashton Woods, Black Lives Matter Houston. Ashton, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
Hey, let me tell you something. I was very impressed, Ashton, for one specific reason. There's a whole lot of people talking all around the country and giving interviews. Some folks have gotten into the movement that I don't think belong in the movement, because they don't know what the hell is going on. And what I enjoyed, or what I respected in what you had to say, is that you tied in the critical factors that anybody talking about Black Lives Matter, especially in the times of pandemic and police brutality, has to bring in, and that is criminal justice, police brutality, as well as healthcare. So go ahead and talk to me a little bit about the essence of what you had to say on that interview.
I mean, I've interviewed with every major network in the country nationally, and I've said the exact same thing. that I said today with additional information, because I think you were getting at the whole, when you were asking me the question, you were getting at the whole succinctness of it all, right?
Yeah.
Because I think of things as interconnected, like connecting the dots. If you have to address police brutality, you have to address the racism in all of its forms. And if you don't do that, regulating the police, abolishing the police won't do anything if all the other systems are still intact. It's like adding rooms to a house with a bad foundation and rotted wood framing. It's like you can't do it. You just can't. And reforming is adding to a system that is already damaged and bad. We're talking about adding stuff to something supported with clay feet.
Yeah, I love the way that Sharpton was putting it all together. But I want to get your, we know that we cannot build on what they have today, because what they have today is a flawed system. I mean, there are things like all these officers in Minneapolis live out of the city. How can they police the city? But how do you propose us actually revamping, I don't even want to call it a police force, a force that maintains the safety of the community?
I think that we don't need a force that maintains the safety of the community. I think that we need something different, and that looks like making sure that we create a system of checks and balances where you don't have a force, because we keep putting authority on forces. And we put authority on forces, what they say is considered official. And if anybody comes out and speaks out against them, all our information, our lived experience is treated as anecdotal. And when we get treated as anecdotal, you see things like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the 6 murders here in Houston, because it's always what the police chief said. Imagine a world without prisons, but with a system where we could develop that. That's up for discussion, how we deal with people who are violent and do violent things. But right now, we have a system where people sit in jail for 6 months to a year, who get paid low pay, who are on low wage jobs, they use public transportation, who are now at risk for losing their homes, their apartments, at risk of losing those jobs because of the way scheduling works, and coming out and having to innovate and do things just to survive. Because in Houston and in Texas, when you do certain things and you get arrested a certain kind of way and certain charges are filed, and those things, even if you're guilty or not, you wind up in a plea deal, and then when you come out, you can't find an apartment because no one will accept you. You can't find a job because no one will accept you. These are the things that we're talking about here. This is capitalism, because it also affects your credit score. You can't get anything without credit unless you got a large sum of collateral. Who do you know? Do you have large collateral to do what you want to do at times you want to do it? No. You poor just like I am. And when people realize, when we're talking about abolishment, we're not just talking about the police. I mean, like, if we literally wanted to do this right, we would go through the city charter and look at every single thing that criminalizes and penalizes, and look at how it hurts Black and brown people who are now the majority, remove those things and have a new charter. The same thing with the state constitution. And as far as, community advisory boards and body cameras and, rules on how many police officers could come in from out of town to work on people, to work on police departments. Here's the thing. The truth of the matter is that this is here. The state made it so that we can't keep people from coming in from outer areas, because we tried that here in Houston. Do you remember the Texas legislature actually regulated and said that we cannot not hire people from outside of the city of Houston or whatever municipalities there are? And furthermore, they regulate body cameras, and they're the ones who won't allow us to put teeth in our community advisory boards with subpoena power, right? We have to know who to be mad at in order to make sure we get the change we need.
So what I like about that is that in that statement, you integrated everything, integrated capitalism, which by design, the masters of the city, the masters of the state, the masters of the federal government are actually maintaining whole. The reasons that we can't attain a whole lot of these things that we want to attain is because it will go in direct conflict with, yes, capitalism. My question to you is this: the concept of Black Lives Matter is a lot deeper. We know all these different ills. Tell me, what are the steps that we are proposing now to go ahead and mitigate these ills? Starting now. In other words, we're in the activism stage in many points. How do you go from activism to action?
First and foremost, I think the onus is on them. What I always do when I organize a protest, or when any other people, a part of BLM Houston, organizes something, we always make it a rule that you have to know people that you never knew before you left the protest. You can't create critical mass or have praxis in community when it comes to creating change unless you know at least 4 or 5 other people that you didn't know before you left this protest. Because if you don't, you came alone, or you came with your friends and that's all you did, you came for nothing. You came to express your anger, which the event is built for community in that context. But the greater responsibility is that now that a lot of people know what to target, who to target, and how to target, or at least the people they can get to learn how to do so, they now have the responsibility, if they really want to see this change that they were demanding at these protests, to show up and ask questions that they don't know and be willing to show up when they have time. Because the danger in all of this is that I see people come and go, come and go, come and go, come and go. When you met me, I was 25, 26 years old, Alberto.
Right.
And I'm 35 now. You've watched me grow up doing this exact thing every year. And it's not about going to conferences and doing different things. It had always been about being able to go to different places to meet people who are like-minded like me, because I can't find enough people like that where I live, and they say the same thing. Mainly because people, all they want to do is sit around and have monthly meetings, talk about what they're going to do, self-aggrandize, and then don't do anything. Black Lives Matter Houston had always been predicated on, I don't have time to be sitting with you with all these meetings in the free Jason's Deli. We know what we need to do. Let's figure out how to do it and then take action. And that's what you know me to be as a personal friend. But for those out there who are listening, I think it's incumbent upon everybody, including myself, to remember that the goal here is to get free. And whatever getting free looks like to you because of whatever oppressions you are under as an individual. I can put myself out there. I'm openly HIV positive. I've been openly gay since I was 14 years old. And I've been an activist since I was 14, 15 years old. You know, I'm a Black Lives Matter activist, but first and foremost, I'm a Black person. And I know all too well, even now, how people deem me as loud, angry, big Black man who can hurt you as opposed to a gentle giant. And I think that when we're talking about these systems that people want to call out when they go to protest and when they move beyond protest, it's time for us to start educating people on what to call things, right? Sometimes we don't know what to call something. We don't know what to call depression sometimes. In the Black community, we've been abused by our medical society over time, and there's a breed of distrust in that, which is probably why we're having such of a horrific time with this pandemic. But also think about when you tell somebody during the pandemic, stay at home and wait weeks before you start doing food distribution, and tell them that they don't need masks after the masks had actually run out, only to tell them to wear masks. And then when they wear that mask to go get food with the little money they do have at XYZ store, they get accosted for wearing CDC certified masks while Black and having to justify why they wanted to buy a gallon of milk. So when we're talking about all of these structures, we're talking about the privileging of white people to be able to take space and don't know how to understand when someone tells them no. And because of that, they've permeated our police departments, they make our policies, and they're not used to the Black women and all the Black and brown folks that have been getting into office. They're not used to any of this. And to bring it full circle, we're talking about this is just now happening. People are just, no, it was after Barack Obama got into office in the 2010. And so when Barack Obama got in, people forget that this definitely started with Trump's birther movement. But not only that, 2 years into Obama's presidency, the 2010 midterm elections came up, and you saw the birth of the Tea Party. And when you put it into perspective, how we empower white supremacy is when we take Mattress Mac
and give him awards and accommodations for doing good things around the city, for getting tax write-offs and taking the money that he does make from his personal time and was donating to the Tea Party and holding fundraisers for the Tea Party and a host of other groups of people, some of us who look like us supported Tony Busby, who is just as bad. And so when we're talking about systems of oppression, every time we buy Chick-fil-A or we go to a certain store, this is what capitalism looks like. Because they're the funders of these people who we want to get out of office, but they will never get out of office because we keep voting against our own interests while being just told simply to go vote, in lieu of all of the other things that I just said, as opposed to being educated about who to vote for, as opposed to being educated about why they're voting for that person and who that person is and what they can and can't do, right? What is the responsibilities of each elected official or position that you are voting someone into? Not just based off of experience because they had elected office before, but this shows you that the only way we can break the status quo is if we don't just act like vote and save lives, because yes, it does, but it's a double-edged sword. Because you can write all the laws you want, you can create all the ordinances you want. It just takes one bad cop, or one bad teacher, or one bad elected official to do something that is so dangerous to our community, and we can't do anything about it.
And that's why activism is so important, and not activism just for a period of time, but an activism that perseveres throughout all of this. One of the, we go back a long time, and one of the things that I've always respected of you is that you've been consistent, and you've been 100% consistent in not what you believe in, because we all, if you're progressive, there are certain belief structures that you have, but it's not falling for the con. Not falling for, let's say, the con that occurred in South Carolina, not falling for the con that occurred, in these different states where we constantly settle. Now, let's talk a little bit about, I know I asked earlier, how do we start implementation? I want to narrow it a little bit. Right now, the buzzword is defund the police. Mm-hmm. Let's localize that to Houston. How are you going to defund the police in Houston?
First and foremost, it's not about how I'm going to defund the police in Houston.
I should say
we're going to hold our elected officials, how we hold our elected officials to the fire and make them do it. Because there's two things. Letitia Plummer did this 8 for 8 thing that came from Campaign Zero. Right. And I'm supporting it, but I'm not actually for the 8 for 8. What I'm doing is trying to show people that even this little bit, even though it's ineffective, it's like adding rooms to a house that's crumbling with a bad foundation and rotted wood. I would prefer that we force HPD to and the Houston Police Officers Union and the City of Houston to discontinue any private talks about any policies and pay and make everything public and front-facing. Because there's $1 billion on the table, and the Houston Police Officers Union gets 100% in how it all goes. That means that we don't know whether or not de-escalation policies actually exist. It means that we don't know anything about their policies in general, because for the last few decades, Houston Police Department has been one of 5 in the entire country, the entire United States of America, that has its general orders redacted, meaning you can't see what they can and can't do. And if you try to request it, I hope you have money, because foreign requests cost money. And if you do get it, it's probably going to be blacked out. Trust me, I know, I've seen it. So when we're talking about transparency and our Acevedo is gesturing around like the court clown, hugging protesters and kneeling with protesters, and then 2 hours later turning around and arresting them, and out of the other side of this, they're talking about, well, we need to see this change on a national level. No, sir. This is natural stump speech for whatever elected office you're going to seek after you get fired or resign from Houston Police Department. What needs to happen is that the changes have to happen locally. Our city government is not transparent, and Sylvester Turner is coming off as a controlling sociopath right now. Because one of the reasons I brought up Letitia Plummer's 8 for 8, right? I know that those are very small reform fixes, and I've never been big on reform. But the point is that I'm supporting it because she came out first. She was a Black woman who held
city council members to account during a live city council meeting and was the only one that was speaking out the whole time that was working in the city government besides Tiffany Thomas and a couple other people. And then I come to find out they don't even want that. She's been getting nasty messages from people who work with her and police officers, right? And I think that the elected officials in our city government need to look past the fact that they got endorsed by the Houston Police Officers Union. You know, the one last year that attacked Black Lives Matter for a botched raid that we had nothing to do with, that caused several investigations, one of being George Floyd's cases that is now under review because of one crooked cop named Officer Goins. Yes. So let's be real about life right now and talk about the fact that he announced the task force and an executive order. Here's the thing. Those same rules got instituted in other cities, but Eric Garner is dead today. George Floyd is dead today. And both of those cities had those same rules. How do you make rules that you don't bother to enforce? That is the definition of pacification. That is the definition of, I'm tired of hearing y'all talk. I'm going to give you what you want, and then I'm going to shut you up and keep it going. Remember what happened with the Confederate statues issue? Are those Confederate statues still up? Yes, they are. I'm going to put together a committee, and I'm going to do these different things. Pacification. No more. No more bull. No more of this. Let me hug you and tell you how good I'm going to make you feel. And sound like Reverend Lowdown at a funeral centering yourself when it should have been about George Floyd. Because truth be told, I left the funeral early because I went for a specific reason. I stayed and I wanted to pay my respect to George and his family, and I wanted to hear them speak. I didn't need to hear from Sheila Jackson Lee. I didn't need to hear from Mel Turner. I didn't need to hear from a lot of people. Not to mention the erasure of the work of all of the activists out there who have been on the ground pushing for this very moment. This is whitewashing, respectability politics, and Negro peonism.
You know, interesting.
That was disrespectful to the family.
Let's talk about that, because you bring up a good point. I think I watched most of the funeral, and yes, I don't think any mention of the work that BLM has been doing. I don't think those words were uttered at all. Am I correct?
Nah. And it's not even about BLM Houston. I think we're talking about the movement as a whole. There are so many activists that are organizing besides Black Lives Matter Houston who are doing the same work that we're doing, and a lot of times in partnership with us. And we're sitting here looking like, oh, wow, look at this. Y'all are going to show protests with Black Lives Matter signs, but you won't acknowledge the people here who are thorns in the side of your ass, because you know if you do, you will be acknowledging that we're right. And that's what they do. And that's why our local television stations seem like extensions of Mel Turner's press room. Like Mary Benton is the news director and not the news director that they hired to do that damn job, first and foremost. Because how many times did you watch the local news in Houston since these protests started, where they actually showed a substantial amount of footage where police were being abusive? Because I think about the deaf guy who got arrested earlier last week and was arrested and charged with failing to comply with verbal commands when he had said paperwork showing that he was deaf. What about the fact that our Acevedo went on all of these national news stories, stations and interviews along with Turner, separately of course, and talked about how kumbaya this all was. You cussing and you doing all these viral videos, but you had Houstonians, American citizens, sitting in a room at an all-site facility so they would get booked in slower on purpose, which threw a wrench in how we were responding to bail response and making sure they had support when they come out of jail. Took us 2 days to get the first list of people who had been arrested. Those people had stood in a room, stood up for 10 hours plus while zip tied. Those are violation of constitutional rights. When you arrest people in the middle of downtown by George R. Brown or by City Hall, and you arrest them and charge them with obstructing the freeway as opposed to the fact that they were marching in the street, that is perjury. That is abuse. So I don't care what R. Acevedo says. I don't care about his feelings and his solidarity with the movement or with George Floyd and his family. And I damn sure don't care about how Turner feels about what I'm saying, because I voted for him twice to keep a racist out. But, you know, representation for the sake of representation means nothing. Have you met Ben Carson, Candace Owens, Clarence Thomas? I don't want to put him into that category, but it's beginning to feel like this is a dystopian city, and all this mayor is concerned about is making Houston look good for the white folk. And I'm not here for it.
Now, let's close this on a very important issue. Where do we go from here? Like I said, the protests are going very well. And I think this right now, it seems like the stamina is still there for it. Where do we go from here?
We go from here, we keep protesting. We're not protesting until we're ready to stop protesting, because we know that this whitewash madness that's going around about defunding the police, there's different ways to defund the police. You can take money from the police and put in re-entry programs, which are needed. But the truth of the matter is, what it all boils down to is if you're willing to take the steps to do what is right. And so moving on from here, the protest should not stop until we say they're ready to stop, first. Second, we need to make sure that we're educating each other. We got to start having meetings and trainings, not just about civil disobedience and knowing your rights with the police, but we actually have to do critical mapping of what elected official does what their position entails, what those rules and regulations are, what they can and can't do, right? Because when we want to stop the Harris County Sheriff's Department or Kim Ock from getting money, we show up to the commissioner's court, right? When we want to know all these things, the data matters. Not to the point that should be a crutch, but you should be able to justify why you need X amount of police officers or sheriff's deputies or constables or prosecutors. If the data doesn't match what you're doing, you're simply saying that you're inflating crime and you're feeding into the military industrial complex of this country, which is why we're living in the police state that we're in now. They think they can do things without impunity. And it's only going to be a matter of time before people start fighting back, and I won't stop them.
Ashton Woods, founder of Black Lives Matter Houston, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.